Hello, everybody. Seismic Mike here, and non-seismic Andy.
Microseismic?
Nope. We're glad that you're with us. We followed Science Mike's advice, and we have flipped our microphones upside down, and my voice still sounds nasally. I still don't like it.
So is the science wrong or is the applied science wrong?
After last week, I have no idea. But we're grateful to be a part of your life wherever you are. And if you're working out, I hope I get some credit for that. If you're studying, I hope we get smarter a little bit. If you are driving, be careful. Be careful. Don't do California stops and check both ways even after the light turns green, because people are crazy.
Yeah.
So just a couple of things, a couple of updates. Many of you have asked, not really, but many of you have asked, has my wife gotten over Bieber? And the answer is yes, but she's out listening to Justin Timberlake. And I don't know that that's an upgrade. I personally, I find the whole thing that my wife is doing right now disturbing. She doesn't listen to this, so she doesn't have to know, and none of you are going to tell her, please, that her music choices are awful, that they bring a black cloud kind of over our house. And it wouldn't shock me that our children are sick because she listens to so much cruddy music. So I'm going to try to combat that. But that's what's going on in the Erre household. We are coming to you live from the world headquarters in Brea, California.
Speaking of cruddy music, I mean, I've got a pretty serious gripe.
Oh boy. Okay.
Hold
on a second. I
have a new worship song.
Your Chemex didn't work.
Nope.
Today. Your skinny jeans didn't fit. I'm trying to think of things that would, your man bun, your hair wasn't long enough for a man bun. What is it? What's the serious gripe, Andy?
I have a new worship song that I'd like to sing for you. And I'd like to get your thoughts.
What?
On maybe the depth of its theology.
Oh my goodness! Is this real?
Yeah, this is.
Is that where you were just checking on your phone?
This is real.
Before we started.
This is real. Okay.
All right.
Are you ready?
Here we go. Boy.
Holy, 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 holy. I'm high on loving you. High on loving you.
Is that what the holy means?
Yes.
High on loving you.
High on loving you.
And that's a Christian song.
Or maybe it's a country song by this awful
by Tweakers.
So Florida Georgia Line.
That's band.
That's their new hit.
High on loving you.
And either they're genius or the worst band ever, which was the same acclaim for bands like Nickelback and Creed.
No, well how can they be
Because well, for one, they're clearly Christian because they turned something into an acronym and then made it applicable.
Holy means high on loving you.
That's right.
I love it.
That's right.
Okay, that is horrific, and that is a great tie-in to bad music. So thank you for that.
There's not much things I bring attention to that I heavily dislike, and that I don't know what is above that on my list right now.
In terms of bad things.
In terms of bad things.
Yep. So on terms of good things, your list includes IPAs, Chemex, hockey, kind of quirky clothes, some sort of hair thing that you do with crazy hairstyles, like 1990s era camo pants.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's on your list of good.
That's right.
All right, now that for a lot of people, that's the bad list. I just want to point that out. All right, that's the bad list.
I consider myself a reconciliationist.
Okay,
and so I do my best to redeem what has been typically demonized by culture into something incredible.
Oh,
but that song I cannot redeem.
I'm high on loving you. Oh my goodness, that. Yet again, and I get into trouble for bashing, the church so much, but man, there are just some things that are ridiculous. I'm high on loving you. All right, speaking of that, we're gonna talk about spiritual abuse.
Okay, yeah,
which fittingly, oh my goodness, the missus is calling again. Hold on, I kid you not, we don't plan this. Hello, Justy, we're recording a podcast.
Oh, okay, bye.
No, baby, don't go anywhere. Hey, so what's one thing you love about being married to me?
That you're funny.
Okay.
And you're cute.
And Do you think I look better clothed or naked?
Wow.
Okay. All right. I love you.
Love you.
All right.
Bye.
Andy, what do you think? Do you think I look better clothed or naked? You've seen both.
Without having seen it truly, I'm going to go with the most natural state because that's how God created you.
Yep. It looks a lot like Baymax from Big Hero 6. But all right. Spiritual abuse. So is this number 4? I think
This would be the 4th.
Okay, so before we were so rudely interrupted 2 podcasts ago by my children, who have no boundaries, evidently, when they walk into the home office after school, we were talking about, so if you're not a Jesus follower, if you're not a fan of Christianity or church, you're kind of, I hope that you pick up on some of the stuff that Jesus would hate, some of the stuff that you hate. And so Jesus is leveling a series of critiques against some of the religious practices, attitudes of a group called the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. And the thing that's so staggering is that they were considered some of the most righteous, some of the most religiously zealous Jews of his day. And the parallels we want to draw when we talk about spiritual abuse is that there is a form of practice, a form and a practice and a set of believings of Jesus following that actually isn't truly Jesus following. And I also think it's conducive to spiritually coercive and manipulative environments. And so I want to go through this list that Luke records for us of Jesus's critiques, because I think they're pretty consistent across all time and space and religious communities. Because, so the first thing he does is he talks about hypocrisy. And if you remember, he's talking about a cup and a dish, and he's making a distinction between the inside of it and the outside of it. And he's critiquing the Pharisees because they focus on the outside, the religious conformity in terms of their behavior on just an external basis. And they ignore the inside. He says, you worry about cleaning the outside, but your inside, you're full of greed and you're full of wickedness. And one of the things that Jesus does is it's devastating against the Pharisee and religious program, because he in a different section of the Gospels, he moves from, hey, you've heard it said God's desire for you is just not to commit murder, but I'm telling you it's anger. That's where murder starts. That's the part God wants to deal with. You think you're sexually pure because you don't commit adultery, but I'm telling you it's the issue of lust that's in your heart that's the problem. You think you're okay because you keep your oaths, but you don't make your oaths according to God, but you make oaths according to Jerusalem or the temple or whatever. And I'm telling you, it's the fact that you have to add like verbal weight to your integrity. That's the issue. Just let your yes be yes and your no be no. So the whole Jesus thing is moving away from external performance into the renewal of the heart. And in Jewish terms, the heart, of course, is the seat of emotions. It's the center of being. It's the seat of will and decision making. And so the renewal of the heart in Jesus's teaching is the goal of Jesus followership. It's not external conformity to rules. Now, a renewed heart will manifest itself outwardly. It can't help but do that. But if the emphasis is only on the outside, and it still is so true in so many corners of Christendom, where what you're seen doing, what you're seen saying, what you're you can't be messy in a church gathering because you'll be judged. You can't be honest about doubts because you'll be judged. That whole thing just needs to be trashed. And Jesus takes special emphasis to warn his disciples against this idea of hypocrisy, that there is an internal reality that does not match the external reality we're putting on display. So if you're not a Jesus follower and you hate the hypocrisy of Christians, Jesus hates it too. And so this is hopefully review. The second thing he says, now he's using a judgment oracle form called a woe, not W-O, No, not
WOAH.
That's how I was going to spell it. WHOA. He's not saying whoa like Bill and Ted. He's saying, whoa, WOE, baby. It is a warning of impending judgment or calamity. And so he says, so the first critique was you worry about the outside, but inside you're full of greed and wickedness. The second one goes along with it. He says, woe to you, Pharisees, because you give God a tenth of your spices. And he uses mint, rue, and all other kinds of garden herbs as an example. But you neglect justice and the love of God. You should have practiced the latter, the justice and love of God, without leaving the former, the tithing of spices, undone. Now, this is genius, because what Jesus is saying is that when you focus on outside and the external behavior, it's very easy then to neglect inward realities, right? That's the whole hypocrisy point. So he critiques them on their absolutely crazy focus. So in the Old Testament, the people of God were to give a tenth of the growth of their land, the produce of their land, to the temple and to the Levites, to the priests, to support the whole temple system. It never said you had to tithe your spices. And so, but they did it because they were so, hey, they're grown out of the earth, baby. We're going to tithe these too. Absolutely. And Jesus goes, oh my goodness. So you're focused on that, but you neglect justice and the love of God. And it's interesting. Jesus says, well, you should do both then. I mean, the external, okay, that's fine. But to the neglect of justice and the love of God. I mean, those are like two of the biggest themes of the entire Bible right there. That love of God and love of neighbor, mercy, justice, compassion, that's the whole law. You want to boil down what God wants in terms of a response and how he wants to shape us and form us. He wants us to love God and love people. End of story. End of story. And so when he says you've neglected love of God and justice, you've pretty much failed at keeping everything. That's the idea. Yeah. You're great at tithing your spices, but you've missed the bigger point. And so Jesus moves from hypocrisy to the issue of majoring on the minors and missing the major issues. So justice and love of God are major issues in the scriptures. They instead focus on a minor issue, which is tithing your garden herbs.
Right.
And so the quick way to say this is by majoring on the minors. They focus on peripheral things rather than on the core, most important thing, right? Which Jesus always identifies as the heart attitude. So it goes with number one. When you are full of hypocrisy, you're focusing on the external and neglecting the internal, and that manifests itself in really some bizarre, crazy rules. And so for instance, we talked several weeks ago about and I think it was in this spiritual abuse series, but it was the idea of fences versus wells. Mm-hmm. Right, that very often we're boundary focused and not center focused, and so in Jesus's day there were all of these boundaries that were in place to identify who were the properly religious Jews and who were not. All right, and Jesus gets into so much trouble. It's just beautiful. So and it's ironic, don't you think, that the main opposition to Jesus came from the religious people. Mm-hmm. I mean, I just think that point can never be made enough. So Jesus would heal on the Sabbath. And this, if you're familiar with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, he gets into trouble all the time about this. The Sabbath was the idea that on the seventh day, the people of God would rest in honor of God's resting from the work of creation. And that this would be a day to build up their trust that God will provide, that they don't have to work 7 days. It's an expression of their liberation. They weren't enslaved and forced to work. Mm-hmm. So it was really a deep sort of practice. And the punishment for working on the Sabbath was death in the Old Testament. So what's it mean to work on the Sabbath became the question. So the ever helpful rabbis, by Jesus's day, had outlined 39 different categories of what working on the Sabbath meant. And these were tied to the building of the temple. And you just had you had some of the just zaniest. You could carry ink for one Hebrew letter, to write one Hebrew letter. But if you carried enough ink to write 2 Hebrew letters, that was carrying a burden, which was considered work on the Sabbath. Same with the amount of milk you could swallow. 1 swallow was not a burden. 2 swallows was a burden. I mean, crazy, crazy stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's hard for me to do. I think it's a burden.
Yeah.
2 swallows of milk.
Oh, my goodness. Now, anyway, Jesus, one of the rules that came up was healing, and the practice in Jesus's day, the rule in Jesus's day was that you could heal somebody on the Sabbath only if their life was in danger. If their life was not in danger, they could wait. So Jesus heals a man with a shriveled hand on the Sabbath. He heals a man with dropsy on the Sabbath. He heals a woman who was bent over and had some sort of disease on the Sabbath. And every time he gets in trouble by the religious leaders who insisted that their rule keeping trumped mercy or compassion, that they could have healed, Jesus could have healed on another day. In the book of John, there's this incredible thing where Jesus heals some guy that's been paralyzed for 38 years. And then the religious leaders get mad because Jesus told the guy who was now walking to carry his mat that he'd been laying on for 38 years to pick up his mat and walk. Well, that was considered a burden, according to the Pharisees, and a violation of the Sabbath law. So how empty can religion get when instead of celebrating, hey, here's the unmistakable work of God in setting a guy free who's been paralyzed for 38 years, we're gonna bust him though for carrying his mat on the Sabbath. I mean, it's absolutely insane. When Jesus was crucified, okay, they crucified him in a way to make sure they honored the Sabbath laws and the festival laws, the Passover rules. And so even though they were crucifying an innocent man, they made sure they honored their Sabbath and Passover traditions. I mean, it's crazy. And last 2 podcasts ago, I told the story of someone who was close to me, who was full of racism and greed and pride and adultery, and got mad at me for playing cards in the basement of a church. And you know, I remember I was a youth pastor years and years and years ago, and we had a guy teaching Sunday school who taught that wearing Oshkosh Bagosh jeans was wrong. I don't even know if they make them anymore. You know, it was they do. Yeah. The Oshkosh Bagosh jeans, wearing them was wrong because gosh was a shortened, softened version of God. And so he was literally teaching in junior high, in our junior high group, that wearing Oshkosh Bagosh pants was wrong. I mean, you talk about majoring on minor issues, right? I mean, that ignoring adultery, racism, greed, and pride, but I'm going to focus on playing cards, right? Ignoring that we're crucifying the Messiah of the world, but we're going to make sure it's done before Sabbath, before the Sabbath starts, right? You have, even in the 50s, you have this incredible racism in the church, but you couldn't dance. I mean, it just goes, there were even people in the church, in the American church, who'd visited Hitler in Germany in the 1930s, who'd come back saying Germany was phenomenal because Hitler would outlaw pornography, was working to outlaw prostitution. He was considered a very moral person. I mean, you just go, come on, man. And has that ended, Andy? Andy, has our focus on really dumb peripheral things ended?
Absolutely not.
No, give me some examples of dumb things. Go.
Oh, I can't support this church because of the type of music that you play.
Oh, good Lord. Now let me, that is, and I've been a part of this, the so-called worship wars, where the debates between the hymns and choirs and orchestras versus guitars and drums, there is so much animosity, hatred, meanness surrounding arguing over the type of music we're going to use to worship God.
Mm-hmm. And what it's interesting now, because so much of the desired rule set is based on preference, not based on some type of religious order coming from some backing. It's totally based on well, that's what I like, and I give to this church, and so therefore my voice is valid, and you should respect that.
We would have people who would stop supporting the church because they didn't like the music style, and they would try to dress it up in religious language. It's my heart language, and it's the hymns are more theological. I mean, it's just a load of garbage, and it is a majoring on the minor, right?
And I regress. I mean, I feel I have my own critical opinion of even the current state of contemporary modern worship music as well. But
let me be clear.
That's not the issue.
Let me be clear. Let me really be clear. If we got the kind of worship music that I want, it would sound like Pearl Jam. Okay? It would be a grunge mosh pit, like an hour. It'd be awesome and depressing, and I'd wear flannel, and I'd break out my big old construction boots I used to wear with my wool socks.
You should just wear that anyway.
Come on, man. That's worship music, right? But yeah, anytime you elevate preference or form, now, and people do this on the other side too.
Yeah.
You know, the hymns are dumb, they're irrelevant, they're, old fashioned, I mean, whatever. And there is this sense that you're a consumer driven, unpersecuted, ridiculously shallow mob when that's the main issue.
Yeah.
It's not doctrine. It's nothing of substance than that. I mean, it really is silly. And you see this even in all the sexual conversations that are going on. So many evangelical churches are focused purely on sexual issues, but we don't talk about greed and the consumption and spending 98% on average of our income on ourselves. We don't talk about the obesity epidemic of which I am a part. We don't talk about the racism that still exists in the church and throughout our culture. We don't talk about the lust issues that we have, the pride issues, the celebrity pastorism in the church. All of that stuff gets conveniently ignored. But man, if it's two guys holding hands in church, whoa, that's a whole different ballgame.
Shut it down.
So and listen, it's all of us are guilty of this to one degree or another. All of these things. I mean, it's easy to say, the church. But I look at me and go, my goodness, there have been seasons in my life where I get so hung up on a dumb peripheral issue, and don't you see that happen? There's a kind of Christianity, or a kind of Christian, which is probably better said, where my one thing should be everybody's one thing. Have you ever come across people like that?
Sure.
It's like the justice advocate who says everybody should be a justice advocate, or like the Bible teacher like me who thinks, well, everybody should know the Bible like I do, or the evangelist who says, well, everyone should be sharing their faith just like I am, right? There's this weird thing that happens because we're not able to keep the center at the center, and so we start drifting, particularly when we've been focusing on external things that you can measure in ourselves and other people, right? Because love of God, that's a tough thing to measure.
Yeah.
And so it's easy just to look on the outside and say, well, is this person going to church and serving at church and giving to church, and they make it a church focus? But you could be doing all of that and have zero love of God. That's the issue.
Yeah.
So you could be doing all the rules and not fulfilling what it is that God most deeply desires, right? Which is an actual give and take love sort of covenant relationship. So we see this, and I see this in me. I used to be totally hung up on certain issues of doctrine, where I was elevating a secondary issue to, man, this is absolutely critical. We got to go to the wall on this. And you realize, no, the older I get, and the more I study, and the more I get to know Jesus, the more I realize the things I'm sure about, that list becomes smaller and smaller, but my confidence in that list grows bigger and bigger. You know what I mean? So the list of battles I'm really interested in fighting are just super small. But we want to talk about, how do you recognize religiously abusive environments? How do you recognize religion that masquerades as Jesus following? And so you say, well, there's an overemphasis on externals. Now, there should be an emphasis on externals. Yes, Jesus is always talking about, yes, you'll know people by the fruit of their life. Totally. But very often in manipulative and coercive environments, that will be almost the entire focus. And one of the ways that happens is you begin raising up boundary markers and litmus tests that aren't central things. So what's your belief about evolution and creation? Do you take Genesis 1 literally? Do you believe Noah and the ark was a global flood or a local flood? Do you think it was 6 days or billions of years? Do you think all spiritual gifts are for today or not for today? What do you think of women? Can they serve? Can they not serve? It's very easy to allow all those issues, which really are intramural debates, to rise to the level of litmus tests and boundary markers. Mm-hmm. And so the Pharisees would judge people based on their not tithing their herbs, or in Jesus's case, his not washing his hands, and they'd miss the whole thing. They'd miss the forest for the trees. And so one of the things that if you really want to look at the kind of leadership you're following, because we all follow someone, in a specifically Christian sense, where's the emphasis? Is the emphasis on the heart, or is the emphasis on behavior? Is the emphasis on the gospel, or is the emphasis on moralism? Is the emphasis on conforming external behaviors, or is the emphasis in discerning and discovering and testing for yourself? Is feedback encouraged, or is dissent silenced? I mean, these are all just ways in which you begin to say, okay, there are religiously abusive environments. There are religiously abusive people. And so you have one of the symptoms of this is the majoring on minor issues. Because some would say, hey, Mike, the whole worship thing, that really is important. Mm-hmm. But it's funny, when I read the text, the God spends more time talking about the worship he hates than he talks about the worship he likes. And the number one, over so huge, the number one indicator of true worship is justice. Do you take care of the poor? Do you fight for justice? That's worship. And any ritual performance divorced from worship is condemned in the Old Testament. Jesus will even say, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me.
Yeah.
So who gives a rat's behind, right, what form we use? I mean, that's so far from the point. And so now, are you with me, Andy? Am I making sense?
Yeah.
Is somebody preaching right now?
Yeah, you're preaching all right.
What's that mean? You're preaching all right could be taken in like two different ways. It could be like yeah, you're preaching all right, meaning you shouldn't be, so shut your trap.
Well, if it was sarcasm, sure, but it's not.
Or it could be you're preaching all right, which is
how good or bad it is.
Average preaching.
Yeah, it's like C-.
I think it's better than that.
Okay.
I think it's better than that.
Yeah,
and I'm not sure. I'm not sure a man who has the good list that you have, that includes IPAs and Chemex and all those things, would be a good judge of whether or not it's a good sermon. I think
that those efforts are justice. So I'm feeling pretty good about him, as a matter of fact.
Now, one of the consequences of the first two, all right, hypocrisy, which is the focus on externals to the neglect of the internal, and the focus on minor issues rather than on major issues. The way this could begin to play out is the death of mercy. And so you see this in Jesus's ministry, where the Pharisees would rather keep the Sabbath rule and watch somebody suffer than see that suffering person alleviated and healed and break the Sabbath rule. They would rather see Jesus crucified than to break in a way that honors their Passover rules and their Sabbath ordinances, rather than really having done the hard work to determine he was actually authenticated from the Father, right? So there, it's the death of mercy. It's in John chapter 8, the Jesus is teaching at the temple, and some men bring a woman, and the text says she was caught in the very act of adultery. All right, so think about that. Not on the way to it, not coming home from it, in the act.
Yep.
And it's fascinating that they only bring the woman.
Yeah.
Right? Because the man was equally as guilty. And so you kind of think, oh, this was a setup, probably. So the religious leaders bring her to Jesus, of course, very famously, and Jesus begins scribbling on the ground. And that scribbling, there's a verse in Jeremiah that talks about how the wicked in Jerusalem will have their sins written in the dust. So I think what Jesus was doing there, because he says, well, whoever is without sin, go ahead and let's put her to death. And he begins,
first stone.
But he begins to write. And so I'm thinking he's just writing sins, the sins of Jerusalem on the ground. And so they all leave. The oldest, it says, to the youngest, right? The oldest who are more aware of their sin to the youngest. Then Jesus says, oh, no one condemns you, neither do I. Go and leave your life of sin. That is where, so another example, Jesus is eating with tax collectors. He's in Levi's home. They're criticizing him because he's eating with sinners and tax collectors. And Jesus says, I've not come to heal the healthy, but to heal the sick. He said, but then he says this, and it's genius. He says it twice in Matthew. He says, go and learn the meaning of this phrase. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. It's from Hosea 6:6. And the idea is, if you're ever conflicted between keeping a rule, showing mercy and compassion, Jesus seems to be saying, abandon your regulations and show mercy.
Like situations where it's like, well, this is for the greater good. Someone's got to, pay for it. What do you mean? Like, you have some circumstances where it's like, well, I can't go and chase and help everybody, so it's like, I kind of have to, I guess, like collateral damage, so to speak, because I'm trying to just thinking about what's the justification for the Pharisees to say, like, well, no matter what, we keep the Sabbath based on these rules, because there's this depth of belief that in a way must mean some kind of like large hierarchical justice.
Well, yes.
So it's worth sacrificing those.
Absolutely.
Aside from showing mercy, compassion.
Listen.
Right.
Listen. That brings up a huge point. I had no idea where you were going until maybe the last two sentences, and then it was beautiful. Oh, Andy. You
rarely call me beautiful, by the way.
You are beautiful, man. God made you. God loves you. And I'm high on loving you, buddy.
Thank you.
High on loving you.
And
it was good to hear you sing a little bit. I'm just not going to lie. That was good. So the Pharisees were perfectly justified in their reading of the Old Testament, because there was an argument about how do you rank the commandments. There were 613, okay? And they're given in a crazy order. So the first commandment of the Torah is be fruitful and multiply, right? So the first commandment in the Bible is literally have sex. And then you have the 10 commandments. You've got commandments regarding the priests and the Levites, and commandments regarding dietary laws and festivals and Sabbath keeping. And so you have 613 of these. And the debate was between how do you rank them? And the reason you would rank them is because sometimes they'd conflict with each other. Like, someone's life is in danger, but I'm not supposed to work on the Sabbath. So which do I honor?
Right.
So you would rank them, and different schools of thought had different rankings. The two major rabbinical schools, Shammai and Hillel, of Jesus's day, agreed on the first commandment, the most important commandment, which was to love God. They disagreed over number 2. One school said, you are to be holy as I am holy. And holy to them meant righteous and separate. Okay?
Yep.
The other school said, nope, love your neighbor as yourself. Now, where does Jesus fall on this debate? Well, multiple times Jesus gets asked, how do you rank the commandments? And a scribe later in Matthew and in Luke says, well, I the two greatest commandments are, love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus goes, yep, you're close to the kingdom. That's right. That's how you rank them. For the Pharisees, the more important command was to be holy, which is to be separate. And so to guard yourself from being ritually polluted. But they'd taken that so far, majoring on the minors, that they'd taken it to the point where they showed no mercy. They showed no mercy. So we'd rather watch a woman suffer on the Sabbath than to break the Sabbath command, right?
Yeah.
What Jesus does is he shows clearly God's heart, which is loving God, and the way you love God is you love your neighbor as yourself. And so Jesus will look at his opponents on the Sabbath and say, well, if your donkey or your ox is in a pit, won't you pull it out on the Sabbath? How in the freaking world will you show mercy to your donkey and ox and yet object to my setting this woman free by healing her? I mean, It's absolutely ridiculous. So one of the central ways you can recognize a religiously abusive person or situation is the death of mercy. There's no permission to be in process. There's no permission to be imperfect. There's no permission to be working it out slowly. It is, here's the boundary markers, and you're either with us or you're against us. And those boundary markers can be behavioral today, right?
Yeah.
Or they can be doctrinal.
Yeah.
So there are some really rigid theological systems that are out there that unless you're lining up point by point, you're not a part of the tribe. And so what begins to happen? So to the Pharisees' mind, the reason God was not blessing Israel and the Romans were taking Israel over was because the country hadn't honored "Be holy as I'm holy." Mm-hmm. And so for them, being holy was a religious duty, and it was also a way that they guaranteed their national security. God will fight for us if we're holy. So when Jesus comes, and instead in Luke, and he does this so brilliantly in Luke, where he says, he replaces the "Be holy as I'm holy" with "Be merciful just as the Father is merciful." He has this huge this sermon in Luke chapter 6 about what it means to love unlike the world loves. And he's talking about loving those who can't love you back, breaking the norms of reciprocity in ancient Near Eastern culture, loving your enemies. He's like, even tax collectors love the people who love them. I mean, what's that? You love your enemies. And then he says, so be merciful just as your Father is merciful. So the death of mercy is one of the sure signs that you're majoring on the minors, and you're in an environment where hypocrisy is rewarded, where it doesn't matter what's really going on in your heart, as long as your professed believings line up and your outward behavior lines up with whatever list these people have come up with, well, then you're okay. Then you're part of the tribe. This Jesus wars against. I mean, every opportunity, right? For those of you who don't believe me, just read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and see how many times Jesus gets in trouble for showing mercy. Now, he doesn't always call it mercy, but he heals a leper, he heals a centurion, he's eating with tax collectors, he's healing on the Sabbath, he's forgiving sins apart from the temple. I mean, the whole thing was mercy, even when he would show mercy to the religious leaders. By eating with them, by engaging with them, by even rebuking them harshly, that was mercy. All right, how much time we got, buddy? I'm on fire.
Yeah, you're going.
I'm freaking on fire.
Yeah, we got another 15.
You're preaching all right.
15 minutes.
All right, one more. Oh, Jesus is just getting...
This is good.
He's just getting started.
This is good.
Now, this one's going to get me in trouble because now I'm the biggest sinner in the room. I'm guilty of all of these. All right, that's granted. Please understand that one of the things that is the great danger of my heart is to in being a public figure, at least in a semi kind of known way in Southern California, to want to just show the best off. Right? Just show the best. It's like social media for your whole life. You just show the best, you show the brightest, you don't talk about your own struggles. And one of the ways I'm trying to guard against that tendency in my heart is by being honest about food, about porn, about pride, about whatever. About judging my wife's music choices, which in these cases the judgments are accurate and protective of the family.
Well, that's the most cardinal out of all of those.
False. All right, so Jesus goes from hypocrisy to majoring on the minors to the deadliest of all religious sins, The one thing that disqualifies you from the movement of Jesus, and that is prideful self-righteousness. That's it, man. That is the one thing that if you're convinced you don't need him, you're convinced that you're good enough, you're convinced you're punching through the lists is what he's looking for, man, we are so in danger when we're in that space. So
is this wrapped up in rejection of the Holy Spirit?
Oh, we're not going there. Okay. Don't.
All right.
Don't do it. It's wrapped up in the verse I'm going to read from Luke 11 that says nothing about the Holy Spirit, boy.
All right.
The next one, woe to you Pharisees, because you love the most important seats in the synagogues and respectful greetings in the marketplaces. Oh, now Jesus, there's a parallel passage in Matthew where Jesus really gets after the Pharisees because there were all of these external things like phylacteries and little boxes of the Bible that you would have and tassels and they would always some of the Pharisees would always have extra long tassels, or they would pray in public these big long prayers so to be seen by other people, or they'd give big gifts in the temple and you know it would be announced, you know, to the assembled throng or whatever. And so Jesus, he just cannot stand this idea. Now because you love the most important seats in the synagogues and respectful greetings in the marketplaces. The issue isn't whether or not you sit in the important seat or whether or not you're greeted respectfully. It's the fact that the whole show was done to get that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like it's okay that there is that there are certain teachers that really help me in my kind of journey with Jesus. And those are people that if I were to meet them in person, I'd feel some butterflies, and I'd consider meeting them kind of a great honor. That's not the issue. The issue is when people do the minoring, the minors, they major on the minors and minor on the majors, and they focus on the external thing, and they do it so that they'll be loved, so that they'll get the most important seats. That's the issue. It's not whether or not you have the seat. It's that, are you doing what you're doing in order to get it and in order to be loved as a part of it and respected as a part of it? Does that make sense? No? Yes?
No, you're just going quick. So I'm processing.
Okay.
It's the difference between I've acquired the seat or versus I am doing the stuff that deserves an acquired seat.
No, so when I'm engaging in hypocrisy, when I'm focused on just presenting the positive, and I'm doing that to feed off the sheep rather than to feed them, to get life and worth and meaning for myself, to feel better than or more special than, right? I mean,
the affirmation that returns justifies the effort I did in the first place, right, so that I feel good about myself. That's right. While ignoring what I truly am. So
abusive leaders, right? Abusive manipulators tend to place a lot of stress on their position and their authority. And they don't earn respect, they actually demand it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And we've got some really high profile examples of that. Jesus, and it's so funny, Jesus rebukes the Pharisees for seeking the honored seats. He says, you should actually, if you really want to be part of the kingdom, go take the worst seat. And if someone wants to invite you into the best seat, great, you didn't chase it. But if you're just going to presume to be there, that's the problem.
And we're talking about a banquet scenario where the certain seats mattered, right?
Yes.
How close you were to the head of the table?
Yes.
Okay.
As close you were to the host.
Okay.
So it was a U shape, and kind of in the long part of the U, there would be the host, and to the right or to the left of the host, typically to the right would be the seat of greatest honor. But yes, it totally mattered. Great clarification.
Okay.
So in contrast, what Jesus did is Jesus de-emphasized the pedestal making factories that Christian hearts have, right? Because whether it's Rick Warren or it's Stephen Furtick or it's Rob Bell or it's N.T. Wright or it's whoever, there is in the Christian church, there's still this celebrity sort of thing. And I'm a part of that. I mean, I'm a huge fan of some of those people. And again, meeting them, I would get butterflies, and I'd want to thank them for the way that God has used them in my life. So that's not the problem. The problem is when we're engaging in all of this hypocrisy, and we may not even recognize it is hypocrisy. Often we're deluded in thinking it's not. We do it in order to be loved. We do it. It's not. Jesus never says, "Listen, don't pray in public." He says, don't pray in public in order to be noticed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's why you're praying in public that's the issue. If you're praying in public to get noticed about how great a prayer you are, well, then Jesus says you've got your reward. People will think you're a great prayer. And God's up there going, okay, if that's what you wanted, that's what you got. He says, instead, go at someplace secret where you won't be tempted to play act. And there do your praying. See, the issue isn't praying in public. The issue is praying in public in a way to be impressive.
Right. Or like what you just said, the way to reconcile the desire to pray in public to be noticed, rather than saying in order to reconcile that, go by yourself and pray.
Right.
And through that process, you learn to kind of dissolve that desire so then it doesn't become hypocrisy.
Yes.
Okay.
And so yes, there have to be places. Now, so the stage is deadly. So I've spoken at Rock Harbor in front of thousands of people, Mariners, EV Free, and the stage, you become defined by it. Your whole week is kind of arranged around it, how good it was, how much feedback you got, and it's so freaking tempting to project an image of yourself that is not true. And one of the greatest reasons there's the pastor's kid phenomenon is because the kids pick up on the difference between mom and dad on stage versus mom and dad at home.
Yeah.
As they really are. Or, hey kids, you've got to behave and be perfect so that I don't look bad.
Yeah.
Come on. That's death. See, that's what Jesus is condemning. And he's also condemning the fact that for many of us who are, quote, in full-time ministry, and by the way, if you're a Jesus follower, if you're a student, you're in full-time ministry. If you're a hockey player, you're in full-time ministry. If you brew beer, you're in full-time ministry. If you're an architect, oh my goodness, Andy's having a coughing fit over there.
So moved.
He was so moved. I didn't say if you're a hockey fan. I just said if you're a hockey player. Okay. If you're a stay-at-home dad, you're in full-time ministry. If you're a doctor, you're in full-time ministry. So what Christian clergy have done has to create for themselves a self-promoting distinction between clergy and everybody else, between those of us who are doing the work and volunteers, between clergy and laity. All of that is bogus. It's not in the Bible. It is absolute crap. And it's designed because clergy think somehow they get exceptions. So, hey, I'm giving so much, to the church that I should have this liberty. Or, the church, it couldn't run without me, so I should take this privilege. I mean, the thing is ridiculous. And there are some churches, and it would be beautiful, and I so desire to want to name names, but it would be a reflection of my judgmental heart more than anything else, where there seems to be this worship or adulation given to kind of the senior focal person, the person on stage, that just isn't healthy.
Oh,
it just isn't godly.
It's a crisis.
But hey, you get lots of followers that way, and no one gets lots of followers by being depressed. No one gets lots of followers by screwing up. No one gets lots of followers by being weak and needy. No one does. So we're just always going to promote strength. We're always going to promote polish. If you're listening to me and all you ever see in a church community is how beautiful and gorgeous and awesome and exciting it is, flee. Flee, because it's not real and it's not true. The world does not freaking need more awesome music and more incredible teaching. What the church needs more than anything is an encounter with the risen Christ. That's what the church needs. And then, and only then, Will we have something deeply to say? I'm so tired of all of this. Hey, here's some tips to be better husbands and wives. Here's some tips to raise better kids. That stuff is crap. All right. You can get that anywhere. What's the one thing the church has to offer? The one thing the church has to offer is its witness to the fact that Jesus is actually risen from the dead and is still doing stuff today. That's what it has to offer. It should not be offering polish and strength. It should not be offering, oh, it's next awesome this and awesome that. And I praise God for our millennials who are so sick of that overly polished stuff. They're fleeing in terror. How about that for a rant?
No,
Andy?
That's a rant. And let me present an additional juxtaposition of like the celebrity pastor to me is like a fool's and cheap celebrity. Because ironically to the statement you made, I would argue that the more honest, the more depressed and all of that, you would have more followers. Why? Look at the music industry. Some of the most influential artists that have been out there and unfortunately have lost their lives to it have gotten so much attention because what they put into their music, into their lyrics, reaches people on a real level.
Right.
Because there's more people dealing with that than walking around saying, I got it all figured out, and this is how I can live my life. I walk in a perfect way, and I'm sustainable that way. The majority of the world out there is hurting. And like identifying with anxiety, identifying with depression, identifying with difficulty. And at the bottom line, I think the most popular musicians you've ever known are honest about that, and it comes through in their music and their lyrics. I would dare any pastor in churches to be that honest and to put themselves out there in that. It's like if you really wanted followership and a higher level of celebrity, you would do that just from a business point of view.
Right, but then it's the same trap.
Oh, for sure, it's the same trap. I agree.
I'm going to be vulnerable in really cool ways.
Yeah, sure. Right.
I'm going to be vulnerable with how lonely I am. I'm going to be vulnerable. The whole thing just becomes, if you're not careful, just a bunch of play acting.
Yeah.
Even the tortured artist can just be another freaking example of that.
Yeah.
And so our hearts are endless in their ability, right, to play act. And I'm chief of sinners, and that's why I come down so hard against it, is because I've participated in it. I've lived that, and I hate it. And it feels like selling Jesus out, and it feels like it has nothing true and right and good to offer the world in those instances. And so let's wrap it up on that. There's an interesting book. A fellow by the name of Larry Osborne wrote a book called Accidental Pharisees. And the subtitle is Avoiding Pride, Exclusivity, and the Other Dangers of Overzealous Faith. And it really was an interesting read. I picked it up this week, and there were some things he said that I thought were really, really good. So if you're interested in kind of more of some of this is a good, quick, really popular, easy read.
I'll put a link up on the post.
Yeah, there's some deeper kind of takes on this, particularly around the idea of spiritual abuse. There are a couple of really sort of significant books that were written in the last, maybe 30 years that kind of identified this and some of the things to look for. But it all goes back to what Jesus was doing, right? That the human heart has not changed. We've gotten more sophisticated. We've gotten, more technologically savvy, but we still, how many people, they go do something and then they have to post about it, and it's beautiful, but they have to post about it. Well, would Jesus warn those people? Hey, if your missions trip, if you have to post on your missions trip, then truly you have your reward. If you have to post about how generous you are, truly you have your reward. Isn't that the same sort of thing? So it's just this endless knot of motivation, and that's why it's so hard to focus internally and so easy to focus externally, right? Because I'm a mess of mixed motivations, and God's so beautiful, and Jesus is so beautiful. He deals even with that, and accepts even that. What were you going to say?
No, I'm just saying the crisis too is culture's encouraging that whole idea. if I'm not posting enough of good stuff, well, then I'm not keeping up with all my other friends who are posting images of great stuff. Like, oh, look at the trip they went on. Look where they're at. Well, I need to do more of that. And then I need to post it. So then I'm in that same circle and get
goodness.
that extended affirmation.
So I read an article last night while I was watching my Cleveland Cavaliers destroy the Warriors, and the world was back to where it should be. The title of it was on the WashingtonPost.com, and it was what it's like to grow up in the age of likes, LOLs, and longing. And so they followed a 13-year-old and her online habits and practices. And it was one of the saddest things I'd ever read. Because, when you're 13, and it wasn't that long ago for me, it's maybe 8 or 9 years ago. So I'm fresh with this. Man, you're super, super insecure. You're super in need of validation by your peers. And I cannot imagine what it would have been like to have been basing my esteem, my sense of worth and meaning and place in the world on the basis of my friends' reactions to my social media posts. So this 13-year-old, she, it's unbelievable. So it's the zillions of ways that you can embarrass yourself on Snapchat by, how many snaps you've done or not done, or she'll post something on Instagram, and if it doesn't get a certain number of likes, she'll take it down because obviously her friends didn't approve of it. Her birthday is spent waiting for birthday, pictures.
Yeah.
On Instagram, and it's, and I sit and I go, on the one hand, I get it because I'm young enough to have, lived through MySpace and when AOL first came up and
Friendster and your melodramatic account.
A what?
Melodramatic?
I don't even know what that is.
Oh yeah, that was another early social media.
No,
Friendster.
No, dude. You don't even know. You don't know what I've lived through.
Bro, were you on Zanga? Do you even know Zanga?
What is that?
It was like the Asian culture social media when Friendster was out.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
Of course I was on it. I know. I don't have any idea. What's Friend? I don't even know what Friendster is.
Oh, then you haven't lived through it.
So I remember MySpace. I remember that.
Friendster was pre-MySpace.
Oh, yeah. I got nothing.
Right.
I got nothing for
All right.
Friendster. And then what was the music service that started the
Napster?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
I remember Napster.
Mm-hmm.
That was, I've lived a lot of life for my 22 years. but so on the one hand, I get it because, obviously we're posting podcasts and people react, and you want great engagement and you want to be well known because what you believe in what you're doing and what you're saying. And so, man, I'm totally sympathetic to it. And on the other hand, my son is 12 and my daughter's 11. And I'm like, this is the world that your friends' reactions to social media posts, that defines your place in the world. And so I was, in terms of the impulse to sanitize, in terms of the impulse to just put your best foot forward, even if it's your vulnerable foot, right? Whatever's going to get the most attention. It's such a deadly space, and no more deadly for pastors, right? Who, as purveyors of grace, as purveyors of truth and gospel and God's love, man, it's so easy. There was a very significant figure who just got removed from his ministry in St. Louis for inappropriate, and they didn't say physically, it was just inappropriate meetings or callings with two ladies, and for building his sense of self and ministry on social media. And I went, oh my goodness. I mean, that's the temptation of our heart. So all of this hypocrisy stuff, it's so easy to point at the older the practitioners maybe of the 1950s kind of style Christianity, but it's gotten more insidious since, with the ways in which we're invited and our world rewards.
Yeah, it seems like there's more traps than ever now.
Yes. So as always, like us.
Yeah.
Follow us. Please follow us on Twitter. Share the podcast, please. My worth today. All right. This is Thursday. This will come out Monday. I am going to check every 5 minutes to see how many plays, how many likes, how many comments we get.
Retweets. The whole thing.
Even if you've left a review on iTunes, do it again under a different name. And I will determine whether or not I will have a good day by your reaction.
Hey, I got banned on Reddit on the Christians forum.
What?
For posting our show.
Why? Because you just were unauthorized?
They have some outrageous fence that's like a 9-to-1 ratio of like self-promotion to conversation. And I was like, I was using the podcast as a solution for other people. Hey, check this out. This might be helpful.
Oh, that's funny.
And they banned me.
Yes.
From the Christians.
Well, because you're self-promoting. Andy, see, you've fallen in. Maybe.
It's not the Andy Lara podcast.
Yeah, but you know what? It's becoming that. People are Seismic Mike I thought would take off, and it's got nothing. All right, so we're going to wrap up this show. As always, we're very, very grateful for you. We really are. And if you are overseas, we hear from many of you around the world. If you are my brother, hello, who was listening in Sacramento. The nice thing about my brother is he gives me lots of likes and text messages that are encouraging. So even if all of you abandon me, he never will. Anything else we need to say? Hey, we got this church going.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
you want to talk about that?
Oh, so, nah. They can go on www.voxoc.com if they really want to find out.
Yep.
So let's do a little blessing. What should we do, Andy? What should we do? Nope. I got it. All right, sing your song. This is the blessing today. This is the blessing today, all right? So atheists, you can embrace this. Christians, you can embrace this. Skeptics, you can embrace this. Here it is. We are holy.
Holy, holy, holy. I'm high on loving you.
Ooh,
high on loving you.
That I hope no one has an accident.
I would hear that and drive my car into a tree.
Right. Or pee my pants. Either way. Until next time, brothers and sisters, go grab a Wookiee mask and go laugh in your car. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Vox, the Mike Erre podcast. Be sure to like Mike on Facebook at facebook.com/official Mike Erre. Follow Mike on Twitter and Periscope at Mike Erre for live interaction and ongoing Q&A. Don't forget to visit subversivekingdom.com for further engagement and information about Mike.